John brought mystery guest on stage. The reveal shocked entire New York. November 28, 1974. Madison Square Garden, New York City. 20,000 people packed into the most famous arena in America. They came to witness something extraordinary, something that would never happen again. John Lennon's final performance with Elton John. The energy was electric. The crowd was hungry. They had no idea they were about to witness the most shocking moment in rock and roll history. John was in the middle of Whatever Gets You Through the Night when something in the audience caught his attention. Someone he hadn't seen in 3 years. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who knew the truth. The truth about what really destroyed the Beatles. The truth about the phone call that changed everything. The truth that would shatter the myth the world had believed for 4 years. John stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused, gradually stopped playing. 20,000 people looked around, wondering what was happening. "Hold on, folks," John said into his microphone. His eyes locked on a figure in the 10th row, a figure dressed in black, a figure from his past. Just hold on for a minute. What happened next would become the most controversial moment in music history. A moment that revealed secrets so devastating they would change everything the world thought it knew about the Beatles. But this secret had been buried for a reason. Some truths are too dangerous to tell. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden forever. The figure in row 10 wasn't moving, wasn't cheering, wasn't singing along like everyone else, just watching, waiting. John's hands trembled as he adjusted the microphone. He knew that face, those eyes, that knowing smile that had haunted his dreams for 3 years. "There's someone here tonight," John announced to the confused crowd. Someone who has something to say." The audience murmured. This wasn't part of the show. This was something else entirely. Margaret Kellerman. That was her name. Former secretary to Brian Epstein. The woman who had disappeared the day after the Beatles announced their breakup. The woman who had vanished without a trace, taking with her the only recording of the most important phone call in rock and roll history. The call that destroyed everything. John walked to the edge of the stage, pointing directly at her. "Margaret," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but the arena's acoustics carried every word. "What are you doing here?" She stood up slowly, methodically, like she had been planning this moment for years. "Hello, John." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I think it's time." "Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. Time to tell the truth. Margaret Kellerman had been Brian Epstein's most trusted secretary from 1965 until his death in 1967. She knew every secret, every deal, every conversation that happened behind closed doors, including the conversation that no one was supposed to hear. The conversation between Paul McCartney and John Lennon on April 9, 1970, the day before Paul announced the Beatles were finished. "Come up here, Margaret," John said, his voice now steady but filled with dread. "Come up here and tell them what you told me 3 years ago." Security guards looked confused. Elton John stood frozen at his piano. 20,000 people held their breath as this mysterious woman in black made her way toward the stage. She moved like someone carrying the weight of the world, like someone who had been keeping a secret so devastating it had nearly destroyed her. When she reached the stage, John helped her up. For a moment, they stood face to face. Two people who shared a secret that could rewrite music history. "Tell them about the phone call, Margaret," John whispered, but the microphone picked up every word. Margaret looked out at the sea of faces. 20,000 people waiting for answers they didn't even know they needed. The Beatles didn't break up because of creative differences, she said, her voice clear and strong. They didn't break up because of Yoko or Linda or business disputes. She paused, looking directly at John. They broke up because of a lie that John told Paul. A lie so terrible that Paul couldn't forgive him. The arena went dead silent, and I have the recording to prove it. April 9th, 1970, 3:47 a.m., London time. Paul McCartney couldn't sleep. The pressures of keeping the Beatles together were crushing him. The arguments with John were getting worse. The band was falling apart, and he didn't know how to fix it. So he called John in New York. Margaret had stayed late that night, working on some contracts in Brian's old office, John explained to the stunned crowd. The office phone system was connected to a recording device that Brian used for important business calls. Margaret accidentally hit the record button when she transferred Paul's call to my hotel room. Margaret nodded, pulling a small cassette tape from her purse, a tape that had been hidden for 4 years. What Paul said to John that night, what John said back, it wasn't what the world thinks happened. She looked out at the audience, 20,000 faces hanging on every word. Paul called to apologize. He called to say he was sorry for all the fighting. He wanted to save the band. He had a plan to bring everyone back together. John's face was pale. His hands were shaking. But John told him something that destroyed Paul's trust forever. Something so cruel, so calculated, that Paul knew they could never work together again. The tape recorder was now set up on stage. Margaret's finger hovered over the play button. John told Paul that he had been sabotaging the band for 2 years, that he had been deliberately writing bad songs, missing recording sessions, and starting fights because he wanted the Beatles to fail. The audience gasped, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what John said next. Margaret pressed play. The sound quality was poor, but the voices were unmistakable. Paul McCartney's voice, tired and hopeful. John Lennon's voice, cold and deliberate. Paul: I know we've been fighting, but I think we can fix this. I have some new songs, really good ones. We could start fresh. John: Paul, you need to listen to me. Really listen. Paul: I'm listening. John: I've been trying to destroy this band for 2 years. Every fight, every missed session, every cruel thing I've said, it's all been on purpose. Silence on the recording. Then Paul's voice, broken. Paul, what are you saying? John: I'm saying I hate what we've become. I hate the music we're making, and I hate that you're too blind to see it. The audience in Madison Square Garden was transfixed. This was history being rewritten in real time. Paul: John, please tell me you don't mean that. John: I mean every word. And here's the thing, Paul, the thing you'll never forgive me for. I've been telling journalists that you're the one breaking up the band. I've been feeding them stories about your ego, your control issues. Tomorrow, when you announce that we're done, the world will blame you. The recording continued. Paul's voice, devastated. Paul: why? Why would you do this to me? To us? Because I'm a coward. Because I can't be the one to end it. So I'm making you do it. The tape clicked off. 20,000 people sat in stunned silence. John Lennon stood on stage, tears streaming down his face, as the lie that had defined his life for 4 years was finally exposed. I never said those things, John whispered into the microphone. I never sabotaged the band. I never fed stories to journalists. He looked at Margaret, then back at the audience. But I let Paul believe I did. Because the truth was worse. The truth was worse than sabotage, worse than betrayal, worse than anything the world could have imagined. John was protecting someone, Margaret said, her voice barely audible. Someone whose reputation would have been destroyed if the real reason for the breakup had come out. John sat down at the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. "Paul wasn't just my songwriting partner," he said finally. "He wasn't just my best friend. He was the only person I ever truly loved." The arena was so quiet, you could hear people breathing. "And he loved me too. But not the way I loved him. And that was killing both of us." John looked up at the audience, his eyes red with tears. "The songs we wrote together, the way we finished each other's sentences, the way we could communicate without words, it wasn't just creative partnership. At least not for me." Margaret stepped forward. The night Paul called, he wasn't just trying to save the band. He was trying to save their friendship. He had figured out how John felt, and he wanted to find a way to work together without it becoming something that would destroy them both. John nodded. "But I panicked. I thought if Paul knew the truth, it would ruin everything. So I made up that story about sabotaging the band. I made myself the villain so Paul would hate me instead of pity me." The audience was crying now. 20,000 people witnessing the most vulnerable moment of John Lennon's life. "I let the world blame Paul for breaking up the Beatles because I thought it was better than letting them know the real reason. I thought I was protecting him." John stood up, facing the audience. "But I wasn't protecting Paul. I was protecting myself. From the truth, from rejection, from having to face what I really was." Margaret walked over and placed a gentle hand on John's shoulder. "Paul knows the truth now," she said softly. "I gave him a copy of the recording 3 months ago." John's eyes widened. "He knows? He knows. And John, he forgives you." From backstage, someone emerged. Someone the audience didn't expect. Someone who had been listening to every word. Paul McCartney. He had been in New York recording his new album. He had heard about John's show, and he had come to finally set things right. The arena erupted as Paul walked onto the stage. 20,000 people witnessing the impossible. John and Paul, together again, 4 years after the world thought they hated each other. They stood facing each other for a long moment. Two men who had created some of the most beautiful music in history. Two friends who had let misunderstanding and fear destroy something precious. "Hello, John," Paul said simply. "Hello, Paul." They embraced, and 20,000 people lost their minds. When they separated, Paul took the microphone. "Margaret's right. I do forgive you. But more than that, I understand why you did it." He looked out at the audience. Love isn't always simple, and friendship, real friendship, sometimes means protecting each other from truths that are too hard to bear. John wiped his eyes. Can we try again? Not the Beatles. That's done. But us?" Paul smiled. "I'd like that." They played 3 songs together that night. Simple acoustic versions of Yesterday, In My Life, and Let It Be. No production. No elaborate arrangements. Just 2 voices and 2 guitars, the way it had started in Liverpool all those years ago. When the show ended, Margaret Kellerman disappeared again. Some say she moved to a small town in Vermont. Others believe she went back to England. But the tape recording, that stayed in Paul's possession. The official story was that Paul and John had reconciled, that their friendship was stronger than ever. The media called it the greatest comeback in music history. But those who were there that night knew the truth was more complicated, more beautiful, and more heartbreaking than any story the newspapers could tell. John Lennon died 3 years later, on December 8, 1980. Paul McCartney was the first person notified. He was found in his recording studio, playing In My Life over and over again, tears streaming down his face. The tape recording of their phone call from April 9, 1970, was never released to the public. Paul had it destroyed the day after John's funeral. Some secrets are meant to be shared. Others are meant to be buried with the people who lived them. But sometimes, on quiet nights in New York City, people swear they can still hear two voices harmonizing in the wind. Two friends who found their way back to each other, if only for one perfect moment. The truth had set them free. But like all truths, it came with a price, and some prices are worth paying, even if it takes a lifetime to understand why. The end.